who is local here. He's the CEO of the Clean Energy Supplier Alliance. Myron Kaczmarsky is the Vice President of Holtec at Government Services. Dale has the easiest name, Dale Vine. He's the Executive Vice President of Business Development at AlliedPower. And then Jeremy Bries, who's the Director of Nuclear Projects at PacifiCorp. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And Chad, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, happy. Maybe. Do I need to do something here? Hello. Switch mics. All right. Hey everyone. Good to be here with you all today. My name's Chad Cramer. I'm an associate partner at McKinsey. I lead our nuclear service line. And so what does that mean? What is the nuclear service line of McKinsey? Well, what we do is we help all kinds of different industries solve business problems. So that could be private equity firms thinking about how do I go invest in new nuclear. It could be utilities thinking about, hey, we want to think about our new nuclear deployment strategy. It could be states who are asking, like, hey, how do we differentiate ourselves and become somewhere that nuclear wants to come to? In fact, there are some folks in here that we've helped with that. But also federal governments, and how do you deploy nuclear? And so what I wanted to talk about was some of the work that we supported with the Department of Energy writing the Advanced Nuclear Deployment Pathway Report. And so, I don't know if anybody read the report. I'm going to assume a couple of you did. But I think in my mind, there are three big takeaways from it. The first one is early in the report, it basically says, in order to decarbonize the United States, we need 3.5 to 5 times the amount of clean, firm energy that we have now. And that's a massive number, right? Right now we have about 200 gigawatts of clean, firm energy, and what we're saying is that number needs to be 600 to 1,000, right? Now, is it all going to be nuclear? Probably not. No reason it couldn't be, but probably not. So when you think about such a big number, like thinking about the scale of what that would take to go do is just kind of hard to imagine based on where our starting point is. I think the second takeaway for me was the value of the IRA and everything surrounding it. And so I'm sure everybody's aware of, the 30% ITC, the 10% energy community bonus, the 10% domestic community bonus, which are, in reality, if you were able to take advantage of all of those, you could essentially build your nuclear plant for 50% of the cost, right? Like, that's a massive number. But the one thing that doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, is the value of the Loan Programs Office. If you think about how much Vogtle spent on financing their nuclear plant, it was somewhere in the order of 20 to 30%. And so, the industry loves to talk about overnight costs, like a plant just appears out of nowhere. But we all know that's not reality, per Vogtle. And so it takes time, and that time leads you to high financing. And the allowance of the LPO, the Loan Program Office, to support that financing drops the overall cost of a new nuclear facility dramatically. I think the third thing, which is kind of what we're here to talk about, is what is it going to take? So what's it take to get to decarbonize the grid in the United States? And even at the 200 gigawatt number that Julie Kaczmarsky has been promoting globally, building 200, tripling the nuclear capacity in the United States means by about 2040-ish, we need to be building 13 gigawatts per year of new nuclear. It was on Monica's graph. Thanks for putting that up there, Monica. Fun fact, Monica used to be my boss when I was an intern at Argonne. Dale used to be my boss as well, so has anybody else been my boss here? Anyway, so 13 gigawatts per year, let's put that into comparison. So the highest amount of nuclear that was ever built in the United States was 10 in a year. It was 1974, right? So like thinking, do we have the capability to build 13 gigawatts today? Like we're not even close, right? And in fact, if you look back over the last 40 years, we've put about 13 gigawatts of new nuclear on the grid. So I mean, the amount of scale that would have to be built between now and 2040 is massive, and it's going to be a challenge. But the good news is for everyone in this room, like that means opportunities for us. So when we talk about that, from a U.S. perspective, 200 gigawatts is a big number. But then when you go look at everybody that has signed up for we're going to triple our nuclear capacity by 2050. All of the nations that have signed up and what they're doing in China and Russia right now, what it actually looks like is not 200 gigawatts of new nuclear, but closer to 800 gigawatts of new nuclear globally. And so what does that mean? What does that mean? So what we've done is we've done some rough math that don't, say this is the exact number, but what we've come up with is the investment in supply, and Monica, sorry for this, but if there's one number you take away from today, it's this number. The investment in the supply chain to build 800 gigawatts of new nuclear, we predict is somewhere around $700 billion. So, and again, $700 billion is a very hard number for people to quantify in their heads. Like, what does that mean? So, to put it in comparison, in today's dollars, the entire Manhattan project cost about $40 billion. So you could build 18 Manhattan projects for what we think it would take to get to the decarbonized scenario that we're shooting for. Are we going to get there? Well, it's going to take some work, right? Like doing something at that scale globally is going to be quite a challenge. Along with that, I think Christine brought it up earlier, but the labor that it's going to take to build that. Globally, we're talking millions, right? This is millions of people, probably 2 million-ish people. And when you say, well, what types of jobs? Actually, about 2/3 of those jobs are construction. Construction and manufacturing, and about 1/3 of plant operations. So, and when you start thinking about how do I sequence all of this? Well, I can train operators while I'm under construction, and so that's it's a problem that's going to have to be faced, but it's not a problem for tomorrow. But the problem for tomorrow is I need people that can go build these things, and I need a lot of them, and I need to start scaling, and I need people interested in doing that job, right? I need less YouTubers and more people with, that can actually move dirt. So anyway, I think the point is, as you start thinking about this, the question becomes how do I, what's in it? How can I make this beneficial for me and my community? And I'm hoping that those are the kinds of questions we're about to talk about. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. That's a great introduction. I really appreciate it. So, needing an order book was one of the most interesting comments this morning as we went through, because when we talk about building these particular projects, the equipment and supplies come from, not only the United States, but all over the world as we're looking at them. So I had the opportunity about 2 months ago to be with the best golfer at least on this panel, probably, and that's Dale. And so I met him, and then I never met him before, and over the next 18 holes, he wouldn't stop talking about supply chain and how important the supply chain is as we go forward. So with that introduction, Myron, Dale, Jeremy, can you, and Dave, can you just talk to us about why the comment about needing an order book is actually important to everybody here when we're talking about small modular reactors, advanced reactors, micro reactors, and every kind of reactor?
Well, I guess, can we hear? I guess since I'm the greatest golfer ever, I'll get started here. But actually, order book. So I was a supply chain manager, past life at a nuclear plant. I can tell you firsthand, supply chain is not favorable to nuclear plants. I mean, in all honesty, we've got 90-something plants out there that are operating, onesies, twosies. There's a lot of quality requirements. There's demands, hey, this valve failed, I need it replaced to keep my plant operating. And we put the supply chain through an ordeal in order to meet that. Now, let's expand that to Chad's number, where we're talking about hundreds of new gigawatts out there. It's not there. It has not been, really receptive to the idea of a nuclear renaissance because they've seen this show before. And I think a lot of people are reluctant to believe the sequel is going to be any better than the first time around. So do we need orders? Yeah, we need them right away. Or we need government investment. We need some kind of folks that will step up to the bench here and get stuff going, because when you start talking about supply chain for a nuclear power plant, we heard the fuel group up here before, and they were an ideal preface to what we're talking about. That's just for one component for the plant, the fuel, an important piece, one component, and there's still some challenges there in getting to the finish line. And I think they have a better setup, as Bob spoke to about what's vanilla and where you can get to the differentiation, than when you start looking at how the plant actually operates, when it's a high temperature gas reactor, when it's molten salt, when it's one of the new advanced smaller light water reactors. So I think as we look forward to what the supply chain will support, we're going to have to help them get on board with it, because they're not going to do it on their own. That's just the honest fact out there, is that supply chain is not going to jumpstart itself. And the last comment I'll make is Christine's slide, when she had her numbers up there, that was a great slide talking about how long a project should take. When you start looking at supply chain, that lengthens that project out. If you look at Vogel, if you look at everything that started here, what happens is once you design it on paper, then you try to build it. I work for a company that does maintenance and construction. When you start trying to build what's on paper, it's a challenge. You have to change. So now you have to go back to the regulatory process to get that change approved. Supply chain, meanwhile, is waiting around for you to actually get to the point where you give them an order. So that's kind of where we are. It's really chicken and egg, horse and the cart here. We have to really look at how we incentivize the supply chain, give them direction for something to actually go build, and help get them started.
Well, I guess I'll just add to that discussion. 10 years ago, when Holtec began the process of developing our own, small modular reactor, the SMR3 was 160. We moved that to 300 now. It went from the SMR 160 to the SMR 300. At that time, 10 years ago, we just began the design of our advanced manufacturing plant in Camden, New Jersey. So the vision was to build a fabrication manufacturing plant that could actually manufacture the large components for small modular reactors. Now again, with the tax credits from the state of New Jersey, that became a reality. 2017, we commissioned our advanced manufacturing plant. That plant was designed to manufacture the components for 1 to 2 SMRs per year. Now we're envisioning, to meet this demand, hundreds, whether they're small modular reactors or microreactors. So again, our vision was to begin the process, but until there is actually the order book, so to speak, or the need or the actual incentives from the government, or either whether it's the state government or the federal government, really there's going to be this delay, this kind of slow process for evolving the manufacturing capabilities. Now again, I'm just talking about the machining, milling, the final products. There's a whole back end of that which regards the forgings that are going to be supplied, and unless there's a demand for it, you're not going to get these forging companies to actually invest in large equipment. It's millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in investments. So there's a large potential backlog that needs to be filled before you start making these investments. Now, in that regard, the Navy, about the same time, the U.S. Navy began the production of new nuclear submarines. And the Navy has actually stepped up and provided capital investment for us to increase our capacity to build heat exchangers for new nuclear submarines. So in that case, again, the Department of Defense decided to come up with the capital investments, though. And those are the kind of things that we'll need, I guess, to, accelerate the program.
So I'm Dave McCormack, CEO of the Clean Energy Supplier Alliance, and I recognize most of the people in the room. And I'll confess that I came into this forum choosing to be optimistic and encouraged, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge. There are a lot of daunting facts and reality being shared by various panels and presenters during the day. The phrase order book, very important to take away, write it down. And I'll paraphrase an earlier presentation with my version of it. First of a kinds are not for sissies. So cost overrun insurance, that's going to be a thing. First of a kinds, regardless, are tough. They're going to take longer. They're going to be more expensive. They're going to turn people away. It's just a reality. But the Clean Energy Supplier Alliance, locally established, but nationally focused, and I make that point for a reason that I'll elaborate on, is focused business and labor, about 40 members, focused on supply chain challenges, needs, and opportunities. Supply chain, not a local thing. We don't need suppliers, we need an industry. For resurgence to occur, it has to be national. Be better if it was hemispherical, and it'd be optimum if it was global, because nobody's going to have a local nuclear resurgence. Not going to do it with one, especially if that one is a first of a kind. We need many. And we're focused on what we've learned over the last decade, and especially the last several years with Vogtle, what that's going to take. Because when you think of supply chain, I typically think of parts, components, bits and pieces, but it's people too, future workforce, next generation. My understanding is the current operating fleet needs hundreds more workers. That's the current operating fleet. Next generation nuclear, going to need thousands. I heard million a moment ago. That's a scary number. That's part of what is challenging my optimism and encouragement, I got to tell you. So we have a project aimed at locally initiating advancement of next generation workforce. One of the other messages that came out of Vogtle is nuclear quality. Competence, proficiency in nuclear quality. Issue after issue came from that deficiency. We have a project to establish a nuclear quality center of excellence. Not for us, for everybody. Nuclear supplier readiness. Nuclear quality is one thing, but all of the demands for a nuclear supplier, nuclear procurements have a higher bar. Myron knows that, I think we all know that. Getting suppliers ready for that, building the systems to challenge and advance business systems for nuclear suppliers, another project that goes well beyond the Tri-Cities. And lastly, the one that wakes me up in the morning is advanced manufacturing, to help economize and accelerate nth of a kind. Once we get past the bogeyman of first of a kind, and we turn that corner and we get faster and cheaper, and it's going to take us a decade to get to that accelerated, economized supply chain. We're looking at, and so is the Navy for naval nuclear propulsion, large-scale powder metallurgy, and I won't go into the details of this, hot isostatic pressing. It's an adjunct to forging. I don't think it's ever going to replace large forging, but complex parts, large metallic components, large-scale PM HIP is a potential solution for that. The bad news is we need to build the first of a kind large-scale PM HIP. It's not been done. My prediction is there'll be 4 or 5 of them around the globe before we're done. I hope to see a couple in the United States. I think we're a really good location here for one of them. Indiana on the Ohio River could be another location. But Doosan, a major large forger in South Korea, is interested. I speculate that Framatome in France may have one before we're done. Large-scale powder metallurgy, an advanced manufacturing mechanism to accelerate and economize. We are pursuing that because of who we are, and Christine made a really good point. You need to understand who you are, where you're at, what you've got. We've got the Columbia River. It's an inland port. We can reach any place in the world through heavy barging. We currently receive decommissioned submarine reactor compartments for placement out on the Hanford site. We're a designated nuclear port. So it's easy to conceive large pressure vessels components going back the other direction. That's who we are. That's why we're pursuing that. If Los Alamos is in the room, maybe not so much. Maybe some other supply chain opportunity. Workforce, cybersecurity, supplier readiness. There are lots of opportunities to plug into the supply chain. It doesn't have to be manufacturing. It doesn't have to be big. But I think we've all got the opportunity, if we pay attention to who we are, what's needed, to find our niche.
Chairman Jewell.
Did you want every single person to go after that one?
Let me turn that off.
No, it's fine. Good afternoon, Jeremy Bries. I work for PacifiCorp. I'm the Director of Nuclear Projects. Most of my career, though, has been either in the Navy as a civilian in operations or our existing commercial fleet, specifically Quad Cities. I do live in Illinois. My company was gracious enough to give me an office fairly close in Salt Lake City. So as long as I can travel, then I can get the job done. But my answer is very simple. We had a whole procurement department, and every time we needed a part, it was always two things. One, it was way more expensive than what I thought it was going to be, and two, it was going to take way longer to get there than what we wanted it to be. And the most expensive nuclear power plants to run were single unit power plants under a utility with only that one unit. So certainly economies in scale and the number of power plants that you're running, but just to, and hopefully, everybody look at their card. Does anybody have the word utility on it besides me? Hopefully I have a couple friends. Somebody, one person, two people? My Energy Northwest friends maybe. You know, the conversation, there's always two sides to the coin, and so it's just very interesting, and we should be talking about it. Supply chain says, we'll show up, we need an order book. I need volume. The fuel supply chain piece will say, we'll show up, we need order book, we need volume. You know, the EPC contracts will say, we can get you labor, we can come down to a certain cost and schedule, but we need volume and we need certainty. And you know, a lot of that discussion is happening on the one side, and so all there needs is someone to put in an order book. Okay, who's going to do that? There's no approved designs except for one, two. And an order book means I'm signing a contract to build 1, 2, 3, 4 plants. And if we're talking 7,000, if we're dollars per kilowatt hour overnight, probably more like 9, 10. You're talking billions of dollars. So, and regulated utility, of course, we're concerned with risk. And so that's really the challenge is how do you parse that risk out? Who are those players? And how can that risk profile be tolerable across all parties to achieve whatever the mutual goal is? Because there's not a CEO of a utility in this country who will sign right now today an order book that I'm aware of for all of those reasons, because all of those things on the other side of the coin insert risk on the other side. They insert cost overrun risk, they insert supply chain risk, they insert everything. Even the IRA inserts risk. 10%. Domestic supply. Okay. So as the utility, the taxpayer, how do you prove that? Not to the NRC, not to the DOE, but to the IRS. And so it was interesting because we were in a conversation last fall talking about the IRA at a utility working conference, and someone had used the term that, the IRA was like icing on the cake, because some conversations had gone on before the IRA landed, and it was interesting. It's really not icing on the cake, it's a piece of the cake. And therefore, if it's not there, you've got some major issues in your commercial space from a commercial framework. So we're all in this together. I echo the challenge. I'm a glass half full. Half full, that's the positive one, right? Mm-hmm. I am which is good because I'm the director of nuclear projects for a utility that doesn't have a nuclear plant. And that's good, and we need people that are glass half empty as well, so that we can get into the actual crucial conversations. But I'm also reminded that planes take off into the wind, so I'm confident that we'll get there. The question is when and how fast. So hopefully these are not all supply chain questions. We'll get down to question 4 or 5 too, which probably a little more in my wheelhouse, but I do thank you for having me today.
So, of course, my next question would be, how do you solve that? But I'm not going to go into that yet. What's interesting is, we're talking about some of the challenges on the supply chain, and Myron, I've actually been to 2 of your plants. Really impressive the work that goes on there. And you said you're looking at your own manufacturing. So, how do you kind of get to that next step where you're putting together, these different parts? And when do you think that you would start that process in order to do that, to make sure that you have the supply to actually construct one of your own SMRs?
Well, again, it takes years in terms of the specifications, final design, then actually going out for procurements. I mean, again, there's a chain of activities that occur in the supply chain. Forgings for large components, machining, milling, then all the outfitting that's done with regard to all the instrumentation controls and everything else associated with a new nuclear plant. Again, we've sort of established in Holtec, we've established our own destiny. We own 5 nuclear sites. We've decided to restart, initially at a very high risk, to restart the Palisades nuclear plant. It's also going to be the location for the first 2 of our SMR 300s. Again, we've broken ground, clearing land. We're still going through the regulatory process, with the support of the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, thanks to the Office of Nuclear Energy. But again, we've made the investment in our own manufacturing plant, adding automation, adding robotic welding. I mean, these are all the things that you have to have. These are all precursors, to what you're alluding to in terms of the time frame. But still, even with all that, I mean, we need to start procuring forgings today if we want to make the time frame that we've outlined in our licensing plan. So, that's 2031, for having an operating small modular reactor, an SMR 300. We need to be placing orders today for those forgings, because those take years. I mean, if we outsource a steam generator, for example, that's 4 years. That's a 4-year lead time, potentially, if we place the order today. So, understanding the supply chain, thoroughly understanding the supply chain and what's required. It's wishful thinking that you're going to have an operating plant in 2027 if you haven't placed an order for the forgings today or 3 years ago. So I'm just saying, again, wishful thinking that you're going to have an operating plant in 2027, 2028 if you haven't placed those orders today or, like I said, 3 years ago. So understanding that complete supply chain is critically important. And again, unless you're willing to take the risk today, again, because we're privately held, we're able to make those kind of risks, for investments in manufacturing, investments in future fabrication. If you're a public company, having to rely on boards of directors and folks that actually risk becomes very, very important in those decisions. You can't make those decisions today.
So Dale, I know you talk to a lot of different people about solutions to move this forward. So what's the solution, or what are the solutions that you're suggesting to get things moving here?
Let's go back to Christine when she made that big question, why? You got to understand the why. I think when you look at supply chain, you have to understand the what. And, to Myron's point, just a little bit about how a project goes is you'll do your planning, you'll come up with your design, a paper reactor like Admiral Rickover talked about. If you ever want something interesting to read, go Google Rickover's paper reactor description, and you get kind of comfortable when you put stuff on paper. When you actually go to build it, that's when things get interesting, because it's been my experience doing projects for the last 3 decades in nuclear. It don't always work out to plan. So when you get to that point, you've got to go back and forth now and figure out what it is you really need based on changes. And I think one of the issues we run into is that we don't know what we're building yet. I mean, a lot of folks are great on the function of new reactors. I mean, there are some great designs. I will not throw darts at anybody out there. There are some beautiful reactors. The applications, the benefits that really address issues that we've not overcome in past generations of reactors. However, we haven't got to ordering the parts because we haven't identified what parts we need yet. We're still refining the concept of how it functions. So if you look at form, fit, and function, when we get to the licensing stage, we're at function. We've got function nailed down. We have a little bit in form and fit, but form and fit is where supply chain comes in. So now I've got a system that has to do X. Where do I find those components? So really the addressment part, I think to Myron's point, like the forgings and stuff like that, the stuff that's the longest lead time, we got to get that nailed down quickly so we know what we need. When we look at large forgings in the United States, how many do we have? Anybody got a guess?
2.
Two?
2.
Yeah, I mean, we're very basic. We're having to go overseas. NuScale is going overseas to get their forgings.
And we're also competing with the U.S. Navy now as well. I mean, all those same forging companies are going to 2 or 3 of the forging operations and the actual manufacturing, machining, milling operations. I mean, there's competition, for what we want to do and accomplish in terms of advanced nuclear reactors as well. So.
And that's a great, I mean, think about that. You're already competing with stuff out there that's getting ordered, getting an order book. So I think part of the solution is we need to, and oh gosh, people are going to hate me on this, we need to whittle down to what do we really need going forward. And when we've got 20 different reactors and designs out there that are all going to be competing for different valves, different heat exchangers, different components, different fuel, we are going to dilute the industry down to where nobody knows with certainty how to move forward. So I think one aspect, we do need to nail down something that we can agree on, some common point. This is like coming up with a common electrical charger for your phone. Lightning versus USB-C, da-da-da-da-da. Y'all know what I'm coming from. We've got to get supply chain lined up around a few components that are critical and key and get them incentivized to go there. Otherwise, I think it's just too diluted, Seth, to really make any movement. Because until we get to that level of certainty on what we need, we're not going to be able to move forward. Does that make sense? Kind of answer you?
Over to me. So I want everyone on the panel to react to this scenario, or this idea. So thinking of SMRs, okay, no one wants first of a kind. Everyone is hoping for nth of a kind. You're not going to get to nth of a kind until you build a few, right? That means you have to build a few. You need an order book. Fine. Order book is large. We're still talking about tens of billions of dollars. No one company can take that on. You probably need a buyer's club, right? You probably need sets of folks who all agree on this is the design that we want and we will back. Perhaps you have one order book for Gen 3 Plus and one that you have for Gen 4. You brought up the idea of we need to select the technology. So it turns out in this scenario that the we is that buyer's club. How do they go about doing that? So 2 questions. One, do you believe that the buyer's club is an approach that might be useful? The second question is, how do they down select? And third, if we think that this is the right way to go, where's the money to do this work, this development work? There's VC money to go and develop technology. There's a ton of money to go and build stuff if we know what we're going to build, given demand. But this development, this is the valley of death. So where does that money come from? Compound question, anyone go.
That's a very compound question.
Yeah,
It's not supply chain, so it's for you.
There you go.
yeah, so just really quickly, I'm aware of certain technologies gaining some momentum with multiple, at least in concept, projects for XE100s from X-Energy, BWR X300s from GE Hitachi, that there are multiple interested parties, perhaps not yet to an order book status, but working on it. And to the extent that those collections of interested parties, deployers, let's just call them deployers, get together and agree to collect, because there's a learning opportunity too. You get from first of a kind to nth of a kind more quickly if those deployers are all sharing lessons learned. GE Hitachi, I think, has got the opportunity to do that. Perhaps X-Energy does as well. Can't speak to very many more than that. But that concept of that growing into a buyer's club is interesting, where they might pool resources to capitalize those early deployments, get to the economy of multiples, and create a better financial deal for them all. Fascinating concept. I'd not heard that before, but I am aware of the fact that there are multiple interested parties for a handful of the designs.
But then also you get into a space of intellectual property for your concepts, your designs, your development, even on your manufacturing side. I mean, there's manufacturing processes and techniques that, that you as a company want to retain in terms of intellectual property. Now that's something that, you have to overcome if you want to have a, sharing of common development and common manufacturing processes.
Yeah, co-opetition is tough.
Good luck with, again.
Well,
Yeah,
I
I think that's a noble concept, I believe.
I applaud you for throwing that question out there, by the way, and really taking the risk of getting thrown out by the rest of the panel. No, it's...
let's be creative.
No, we are. So let's say we'll do 10 reactors. Let's do an order book of 10 reactors. So second table up here, Brian's got the first unit.
Let's go.
The DOE's paying for half of it, so that doesn't really count anyway. Everybody else has a unit, that's 9, and then Brian gets a second unit, that's 10. Okay, so 10 utilities, 10 units, order book of 10. Somehow we get to a commercial structure, and everybody has a flat price, and we're going to spread that risk of everything, which is a great idea, by the way.
That's right. You buy
across,
the average price, not the first.
That's right.
defined price.
Okay.
That's the point.
So that's the point. Which one of you goes first? It's a buyer's club, but which one of you goes first? Those are some of the real challenges that we, again, get into, which is, and this is my opinion, but in that scenario, they're often, it's the conversation's focused at the utility level. And there's no developer. I don't mean a technology provider, I mean the developer. Who's the developer that maintains the IP, not for how to design a plant, not for how to operate it, but for how to build it, and build it well. And build it well for the first one, and the second one, and the third one. And so you get into this conversation where not only do each individual utility not want to cost physically own, would you rather own 100% of one unit or 10% of all 10? Well, you'd rather own one. And so whose money is going when, and where is that IP? Like, why do I want to be the first person when I can be the fourth? And let the first one learn all the hard lessons, and then I capitalize on that.
But it's,
and
the,
so,
same, but it's the same price.
But, well, yeah, the reason you can't be fourth if there's no first. And that's why, like, yeah, I'd love to be 10th, but I don't get that option because I need one to happen. And so, and to your point, like, who's going to build the first one? I don't think of it that way. I would think of it as we all own 10% of this. We're all into it 10%. And we're going to, all pony up and spread the cost, and the first one's going to be more expensive than the fifth one, which is going to be more than the ninth one. But I think it's a legitimate option. We call it a consortium model. But I fully agree that like an integrated project delivery model where we have a developer who actually knows how to go build something big and do it effectively, I think is critical to making that work. Because having 10 different construction companies at 10 different sites is probably not the way to get down that learning curve.
And, I will tell you the analogy that I like to use in this case is y'all been to the carnival and you've seen a little game where you have the water gun and you have all the horses and everybody's trying to get their little water gun in there to get their horse across the finish line first and win their little stuffed animal that's about yay big. That's how we're doing it right now. Be honest, everybody's competing for grant money and, agreement here and money there, loan share. And the reality is, I think this panel is kind of in unanimous agreement is somebody's got to get over then be the first for there to be a second, third, fourth, and fifth. And if you use the analogy of like when they have to scale a 30-foot wall with people with no tools or anything, you have a group of guys run up, that's the base, another group of folks, another one, and you get one over the wall. And then that other one reaches back over the wall and pulls everybody else over. In all honesty, when we look at power projection and energy security, we are almost at the point of something that you would consider a Manhattan Project or a space race. We've got to get somebody over the wall. And that does require, I think, some selflessness, from the industry and to say, hey, there's somebody here, or maybe two, that we get over the wall so that the rest of us can follow. Because until we get folks over the wall, the investment community is not going to get in. Right. The supply chain's not going to get in. Folks are really not going to believe that we can do this until we get somebody over that wall. And that's just kind of my simple terms of putting it in is those two analogies. We can't be chasing horses right now.
I guess I was going to say, Dale, we will build 2 SMR 300s at Palisades. There's no question. Mm-hmm. Holtec will build 2 SMRs at Palisades. The question is, how does the rest of the supply chain support the rest of the industry? Again, we will build 2 SMRs, but does that answer the question? I don't think it totally answers the question of being first. But the supply chain still needs to be.
Doesn't it help though? I mean, so right now the United States, when it looks at this, and that's why I was, Dale and I, when we were talking about this, we were talking about what's the focus of the appropriators and what's the focus of Congress and how they use their money to support these types of projects. And so, right now.
But I don't see the funding coming from Congress for nuclear manufacturing.
You're right.
I don't see any. I see lots of FOAs. I see lots of grants going to non-nuclear clean energy manufacturing, but.
Right, and I think though our point was really the focus of looking at the broader picture, but then also maybe, the Nuclear Energy Office has to select a smaller number of projects as it's going forward, possibly as it's looking at them, because then you've got a large amount of money. There's still a lot of interest in supporting these projects. The first of a kind, we thought UAMPS was going to be that first one as it went through. UAMPS, by the way, had a buyers club because UAMPS is a consortium of various parties that were looking at different technology in order to move forward. They had government support as they were going forward. They had orders. They didn't have, by the way, they didn't have all, they still needed to be able to sell some of the power to third parties. Some of them were government. The Nuclear Energy Office stepped up to buy some. NNSA would not buy any of it, which was really interesting as you go forward. But you need, setting up the pieces so you've got the private side and the public side for these first of a kind. I think that's what you're doing in Palisades. You've got the demand, and then you'll also get federal support for the particular project in order to move it forward. But is that enough to get to where and you're saying no.
That's the question.
To get the suppliers then to say, oh, wow, now we've got this one. I think it's more than, we keep talking about the Tri-Cities or there's 4 cities. I think it's going to be more than 4 of these projects in order to move it forward. But we need to see the first one, open. And I think that's going to, I talk to people all the time, and they're like, how do I invest in this? This sounds exciting. We need this. How do I do that? Where do I invest my money? Who are these people that I should be looking to invest in? And so I think that there's a demand on the private sector side, and I think there's a demand on the public sector to support it as we're going forward. When I think about it, I'll give it to you in a second. When I think about it is, you've got the French are investing heavily in it. The Koreans are investing heavily in it. The Russians obviously have been invested. The Chinese. We're competing around the world if we want to build these things. And so the question is do we want to build them in the United States, or do we want to have foreign parts?
We're competing with countries. We're not competing with
Right.
on the commercial side.
Yep.
You're literally competing with countries.
Yep.
So there's a big difference.
Yeah, I'm open to the possibility that first of a kind is too big a lift for a public utility. I'm not certain that it's a lift that an investor-owned utility can handle. I think first of a kind is certainly something that the government could be positioned for to get us over that hump, and that's certainly what's happening in other countries. The first of a kind is a government project. I think investors are looking at too long a payback period to be comfortable with it, and there's too much obligation to ratepayers to really manage that unavoidable increase in cost and schedule associated with first of a kind. It's a daunting prospect for other than perhaps industry to lead the way, and that's part of the logic in my mind behind Dow taking the ARDP project with X-Energy down to Texas, because they are essentially self-funding.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 audience questions, and I apologize that there's been 2 back-to-back panels and we haven't gone to the audience, so please.
I have a quick first question. Thank you for the incredibly depressing. I'd said it was a depressing conversation. But my question is, if I'm a local community and I know that my coal-fired power plant is going to be decommissioning, why do I consider nuclear right now? What's that realistic timeline? How do I have any confidence that if I'm looking to reutilize this facility and the infrastructure, that nuclear is the right move?
Well, it certainly has very strong parallels. I mean, in Utah and Wyoming, it's been amazing to me to see the support for nuclear, and I've lived so long in the nuclear for the sake of nuclear, like in the industry that is there, so to step out into a new market. But, it just brings, you've got energy security, you've got a power plant that's going to be there for generations, you have a strong tax basis. I mean, you have so many parallels to an existing coal plant, but even better in many cases, that it's very natural to look at that and say, yeah, I could see that transition working. When to start? Well, when do you plant an oak tree, right? I mean, 20 years ago. And so trying to find, even if the utility is not present in the conversation, maybe try to engage that utility. We just heard earlier from St. John's in Arizona and how they had worked with GAIN and to engage the Salt River Project utility themselves. But there's a lot of things that can be done both at the local and at the state level that just helps anybody, any developer, whether it's the utility or an IPP, be able to develop a nuclear power plant there. And so I would just encourage, to use GAIN as much as possible. Christine King is back there. I know her personal phone number, her address, and where what hotel she's at tonight, so that business is open. And again, just what are those things that can be done now within the power of the local community?
Yeah, thank you guys for being here today. Greg Cullen from Energy Northwest. For the Tri-Cities folks, it won't surprise them that I'm not really going to ask a question. I'm going to make a comment. But Kara, when I met her last night, told me she said I had to. So, I've been trying to think of a really good analogy, and I've been struggling. So I got two clumsy ones, so bear with me. I think of if I was standing at the bottom of the steps to the Lincoln Memorial, and I said, it would be really, really cool if someday I could be standing up there at the foot of Lincoln, right? Gosh, I wish that would happen. What would you guys tell me?
Take the first step.
Take the first step, right? Start taking some steps, Greg. If you want to get up there, we got to take some steps, right? The second analogy I think of is Steve Jobs used to talk about inventing the smartphone, right? He said the public had no idea they needed or wanted the smartphone. We had to invent it and create it, right? So I'll just tell you, I understand the message, I really do, but I also get a little frustrated with supply chain part that says, bring us an order book and then we'll come along, right? $800 billion represents a huge lift for us from an investment standpoint, but it also represents an incredible opportunity, right? And we've been talking today all day about energy security and decarbonization. These are existential issues, right? That quite frankly, those of us in the utility community have concluded we don't have a choice. We have to have this technology, okay? However, my friend Jeremy, the other utility guy, said, right, so you're asking me to go place order books worth of orders before I know if the supply chain's going to be there for me, right? So what my request to the supply chain folks is, share my vision and my passion, and let's take little steps together. I'm not asking you to sink $800 billion tomorrow, just like I'm not willing to commit $1 billion to $3 billion today, right? But let's take these steps together, and let's take the little steps at a time and move along. There are companies like Holtec that have shown some vision. All right, no utilities want to place the order, we'll do it ourselves, right? When they built their manufacturing facility, they said, we're going to look ahead, and we're going to build it in a way that we can add things. There are companies like Curtiss-Wright that are investing already in trying to be ready and doing design work and trying to move along and be a part of the solution, right? I'm looking for supply chain people that want to help, share the passion, the vision, take the little steps with me, and let's do this together. Yes, it's a chicken and egg, and there are going to be places where part of what we're going to do together is we're going to go to the federal government and say, we need you to break this deadlock. But there are a lot of other places where we just need to be taking these small steps together. But if all we hear from the supply chain is, come see us when you're ready to place an order book worth of orders, then guess what? This is all going to pass, and it's never going to come to be. So apologies for comment only, but this can be depressing, but I think we need to flip this around and realize this industry, the nuclear industry, has also been built on the backs of cooperation and collaboration. And I think we can do that again, and we can make this work and take this opportunity and make it $800 billion or more worth of opportunity for us, as long as we're willing to work together and take steps together.
Thank you, Greg. So we have time for one quick question and one very quick answer, because you're staying between everybody cookies and coffee.
I'll just make a quick comment. Greg's absolutely, I fully support Greg's comments on that. A couple quick things. We have to remember, the United States does not function like Europe. We are not a nationalized utility. We are not nationalized energy companies. So the model that Europe uses doesn't necessarily work in the United States. Secondly, we don't really want the Department of Energy to pick winners and losers. This is a commercial, competitive corporation. We had at one time B&W, GE, Westinghouse, and they all competed successfully at one point in time. And the most successful operation that was done in the 70s and so on was not the one that uses the same standard design across their entire country. It was the one that built in clusters. And when they built them in clusters, one technology built in clusters, they got the benefit of the knowledge of construction. And their success was built on basically keeping to their construction schedules. There weren't single units, they were single clusters of units, 4 or 5 clusters, but they weren't the same technology. One cluster may be a BWR, another cluster may be a PWR, and so on. And the supply chain doesn't necessarily work for one that works for the others. Our friends at Holtec are going to build 2 beautiful plants up at Palisades. Their supply chain may not work for our supply chain, which is going to be an advanced sodium-cooled reactor. So the supply chain needs to be developed understandably with individual organizations that match what we can do. So we can't just say Holtec jumps over the wall first and the supply chain will follow, because they won't.
That's right.
And it may work well for Holtec, but it's not going to work well for the rest of the guys. So what Greg was talking about was the small steps we need to move forward. And the individual guys, like the Holtecs or the TerraPowers or the so-ons, we can't develop order books. We can't develop 20 plants in an order book, because the guys signing the order books don't take you credibly if you don't have the financing to back it up. And so that model doesn't really hold together. There are some progressive utilities that will help do that, but that model needs to be rethought, because that doesn't really hold together. So we need to be able to move these steps a little forward. We need to have federal support in the way of grants and funding support to the individual projects, but we can't be picking and choosing individual winners and losers and leaving the other guys on the table who may not be politically astute enough to pick it up at the right point in time. So my comment, I apologize if I got a little bit carried away, but that's kind of my thought.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel. This is a great panel. And so please, everyone, come back in 15 minutes, 3:30. Thank you.